Democracy, derived from the Greek demokratia, rule of the people, is one of the most celebrated forms of government. It champions individual rights, equality, and popular sovereignty. However, as with all political systems, democracy is not immune to degradation. One of its historical and philosophical threats is ochlocracy, the degeneration of democracy into mob rule. Ochlocracy, from the Greek ochlos, mob, and kretos, power, describes a condition where decisions are dictated by the whims of the masses rather than law, reason, or ethical principles. Understanding how democracy can devolve into ochlocracy requires a deep dive into political theory, historical examples, and psychological dynamics that underlie collective behavior. The philosophical foundation, from ideal to decay. The transformation of democracy into ochlocracy was first discussed in depth by ancient Greek philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle. Plato in the Republic warned of the perils of democratic freedom turning into excess. He observed that when every individual believes themselves to be the ultimate judge of truth, societal norms and institutions lose authority, leading to anarchy and eventually tyranny. Aristotle, in Politics, categorized government forms by whether they serve the common good or self-interest. He saw democracy as a just form that could easily decline into ochlocracy when driven by passions, rather than deliberation. According to Aristotle's cycle of regimes, anacyclosis, political systems move cyclically. Monarchy becomes tyranny, aristocracy becomes oligarchy, and democracy degenerates into ochlocracy. This occurs when the balance of power tips from rational discourse and institutional structure to emotional fervor and populist manipulation. 2. Mechanisms of degradation. 1. Populism and demagoguery. One of the key factors that accelerate the transition from democracy to ochlocracy is the rise of populist leaders and demagogues. These figures appeal directly to the emotions, fears, and prejudices of the masses, often bypassing rational policy debate or institutional checks and balances. Rather than presenting well-reasoned policies, they focus on charisma, spectacle, and simplistic solutions to complex problems. History offers vivid examples: leaders who gain power through democratic means only to dismantle democratic norms once elected. Adolf Hitler, who rose to power via democratic elections in the Weimar Republic, used populist rhetoric and fear-mongering to mobilize the masses and destroy democracy from within. 2. Erosion of institutions and the rule of law. A hallmark of ochlocracy is the weakening of legal institutions and disregard for constitutional norms. In a healthy democracy, institutions such as independent judiciaries, free press, and legislative checks serve as stabilizers. When these are undermined, either by legislative overreach, media control, or judicial manipulation, decision-making becomes susceptible to mob pressure. Law becomes malleable, shaped not by justice, but by the loudest voices or largest crowds. 3. Polarization and tribalism. The transformation is also fueled by political polarization and identity-based tribalism. When citizens identify more strongly with factions than with democratic principles, the social fabric frays. Dialogue is replaced by demonization. Opponents are viewed not as fellow citizens with different views, but as enemies to be defeated. This mindset nurtures a climate where decisions are made not by compromise or majority consensus, but by whoever can shout the loudest, organize the biggest protests, or dominate social media narratives. 4. Media manipulation and information overload. In the digital age, the spread of disinformation and echo chambers exacerbates mob behavior. Algorithms reward sensationalism and emotional outrage, pushing rational discourse to the margins. Viral misinformation can prompt mass protests, boycotts, or violence based on false premises. This phenomenon empowers mobs with tools to pressure governments, cancel individuals, and shape policy outside formal mechanisms. What once required deliberative process is now settled by Twitter trends or viral videos. Historical examples. 1. The Athenian precedent. Ancient Athens is often hailed as the cradle of democracy, but it also provides one of the earliest examples of its corruption into ochlocracy. The execution of Socrates in 399 BCE demonstrates how the democratic system could be manipulated by mass passions. Socrates was sentenced to death by popular vote, accused of corrupting youth and impiety, charges largely fueled by political sentiment and scapegoating rather than evidence. Similarly, Athenian assemblies occasionally voted for rash military decisions, such as the disastrous Sicilian expedition during the Peloponnesian War. 2. The French Revolution. In the late 18th century, France transitioned from monarchy to republic with ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. However, the revolution soon succumbed to chaos and mob rule. The Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794, led by the Jacobins and Robespierre, is an archetype of ochlocracy. Revolutionary tribunals executed thousands based on suspicion or accusation. Rational governance was suspended in favor of ideological purity, fear, and mass hysteria. The guillotine became a tool of popular vengeance, not justice. 3. Modern cons. Contemporary democracies are not immune. In recent decades, populist waves in the United States, Hungary, Brazil, and elsewhere have shown how democratic structures can be undermined from within. The storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, is a modern echo of ochlocracy. A crowd driven by misinformation and political fervor attempted to override an electoral process. Similarly, mass protests in various nations have pressured parliaments to reverse or enact laws not based on deliberation but public outrage. Psychological roots of mob rule. Understanding ochlocracy also demands an analysis of crowd psychology. Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, 1895, argued that individuals in crowds often abandon rationality and moral restraint. The anonymity of crowds emboldens people to act violently or irrationally. Emotions such as anger, fear, or euphoria become contagious, often leading to mob justice or vigilantism. Social media exacerbates this dynamic by creating digital mobs. Cancel culture, online harassment, and viral misinformation exemplify how virtual crowds can exert real-world pressure on governments, corporations, or individuals, often outside democratic or legal processes. V. The slippery slope from participation to pandemonium. One might argue that citizen activism is a sign of healthy democracy. Indeed, protests, civil disobedience, and grassroots movements are often vital in resisting tyranny or injustice. However, when collective action becomes unmoored from facts, legal norms, and institutional engagement, it risks devolving into ochlocracy. A democracy begins to erode when emotions override evidence in policy decisions. Popular sentiment trumps expert analysis or judicial review. Public trials occur not in courtrooms, but on social media. Laws are made or repealed not in parliaments, but in protests. Leaders govern not by principle, but by polling and pandering. Ves. Preventing the decline. To prevent the slide into ochlocracy, democratic societies must strengthen 1. Civic education. Citizens should understand the structure, values, and responsibilities of democratic systems. A well-informed public is less susceptible to manipulation. 2. Independent institutions. Courts, media, and oversight bodies must remain independent from political pressure and majoritarian impulses. 3. Deliberative forums. Encouraging structured debate, town halls, and consensus-building platforms can re-center democratic dialogue. 4. Media literacy. Teaching people to critically evaluate information and resist emotional manipulation reduces the power of disinformation-fueled mobs. 5. Constitutional safeguards. Constitutions should include protections against hasty changes based on popular moods, ensuring long-term stability over short-term populism. Conclusion. The transition from democracy to ochlocracy is not always sudden. It is often a slow erosion, masked by the very language of democracy itself. It begins when leaders manipulate the will of the people for personal gain, when emotions eclipse reason, and when institutions fail to check mass pressures. To protect democracy, societies must be vigilant not only against tyranny from above, but also against chaos from below. Rule by the people must never become rule by the mob. Only through education, institutional resilience, and a commitment to principled governance can democracy withstand its internal threats and remain a system of liberty and justice for all.